Imagine a giant container ship cutting through the midnight ocean. Its decks are stacked high with goods worth billions of dollars. It's electronics from China, coffee from Brazil, cars from Germany. This ship, a symbol of our connected world, is owned by a nameless shell company in Panama. It's financed through a trust in the British Virgin Islands and insured by a Swiss bank that doesn't ask too many questions. This is the great paradox of our time. The global economy, a vibrant exchange of goods worth $28 trillion every year, is propped up by an invisible web of secrecy. In this shadow world, trillions of dollars vanish, dodging taxes, fueling corruption, and silently reshaping power. Our story begins not with computers and corporations, but with sails and smugglers. In the 17th century, the first seeds of this system were sown. Dutch and British merchants used remote outposts like Curaçao to dodge tariffs and hide their profits from the crowns of Europe. These were the original offshore havens. But the system we know today truly took shape after World War II, as nations struggled to rebuild. Wealthy individuals and businesses looked for ways to move their capital out of unstable regions. Switzerland, with its strict banking secrecy laws established in 1934, became a magnet for this hidden wealth. Then, in the 1960s, something shifted. The eurodollar market exploded in London. This was a massive pool of US dollars held in banks outside the United States, completely unregulated and opaque. It laid the financial groundwork for the modern offshore system. The British Virgin Islands, once a quiet British colony, was transformed in 1984. New laws were passed allowing the creation of anonymous companies with incredible speed and secrecy. By the 2000s, this tiny cluster of islands was home to over 400,000 corporate entities. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate design. Western banks, law firms, and accountants had crafted a parallel financial universe where assets could flow freely, untaxed and unseen. For decades, this shadow system operated largely out of sight. But then came the leaks, turning points that ripped back the veil of secrecy. In 2016, the world was stunned by the Panama Papers. A massive leak of 11.5 million documents from a single law firm, Mossack Fonseca, exposed how the global elite hid their fortunes. The files revealed a staggering network of over 200,000 offshore entities, implicating 140 politicians and high-ranking officials. For example, Sergei Roldygin, a cellist and close friend of Vladimir Putin, was found to control assets worth $2 billion through shell companies in Panama. 5 years later, in 2021, the Pandora Papers blew the lid off again. This time it was nearly 12 million files from 14 different offshore service providers. The leak linked 35 world leaders and over 330 public officials to secretive companies, mostly registered in the British Virgin Islands. We learned that King Abdullah II of Jordan had secretly amassed a $106 million property empire through 36 different shell companies. The Czech Prime Minister at the time, Andrej Babis, was found to have funneled $22 million through offshore accounts to buy a lavish chateau in the south of France. These scandals did more than just expose tax avoidance. They illuminated how the system fuels outright crime. Take the 1MDB scandal in Malaysia, where $4.5 billion were siphoned from a state development fund and laundered through this very offshore network. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the shadow system was thrust into the spotlight once more. Russian oligarchs, targeted by sanctions, used trusts in places like Cyprus and the Cayman Islands to hide their assets, moving super yachts and private jets through complex layers of anonymous ownership to evade capture. At its core, this shadow system functions like a global circulatory network for dirty money. It is estimated that between $1 and $1.6 trillion in illicit financial flows are pumped out of developing countries every single year. There are over 80 jurisdictions that qualify as tax havens, and together they hold at least $11.3 trillion in offshore wealth. It's not just oligarchs and criminals. Multinational corporations are masters of this game. They shift an estimated $1 trillion in profits to low-tax havens annually, costing governments around the world a staggering $200 billion in lost tax revenue. Major international banks like HSBC and Credit Suisse have been caught facilitating these flows, processing billions for questionable clients despite numerous red flags. The economic distortion is immense. Consider counterfeit goods. This illicit trade, worth up to $2 trillion a year, floods global markets. It accounts for 2.3% of all global imports and undercuts legitimate businesses in the EU by almost 5%. The global arms trade, valued at $100 billion, it also thrives in the shadows, with deals often routed through free trade zones in places like the United Arab Emirates to bypass international embargoes. But the real cost is human. In Africa, the amount of money lost to illicit financial flows is greater than the total amount of foreign aid the continent receives. This starves countries of the funds needed for schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. It means a miner in the Congo earns just pennies for the cobalt he digs, while the profits from that same cobalt are funneled through offshore accounts to pay for luxury villas on the other side of the world. The shadow system isn't just a financial curiosity. It's a machine that actively creates and perpetuates global inequality. Looking ahead to 2025 and beyond, the shadows are only deepening, evolving with new technology and geopolitical tensions. Global trade is projected to hit $32 trillion. But the illicit flows alongside it are expected to swell to a staggering $3 to $5 trillion a year, an amount that rivals the GDP of major world economies. We see China's Belt and Road Initiative, with loans often structured through opaque offshore vehicles that can trap nations in debt. We see Russia creating mirror payment systems with its allies to bypass the mainstream SWIFT network and evade sanctions. Our global supply chains, whose fragility was exposed during the pandemic, are another area of concern. 90% of all trade travels by sea. Yet the ownership of the vessels that carry these goods is often deliberately obscured, making it easier to bust sanctions and smuggle illicit cargo. And technology is an amplifier. Cryptocurrencies, once hailed as a tool for financial freedom, are now used to launder an estimated $8 billion a year through unregulated offshore exchanges. But there are cracks of light appearing. In 2023, the European Union introduced new anti-money laundering rules specifically targeting the abuse of shell companies. The G20 is pushing for public registries that reveal the true beneficial owners of companies, tearing away the cloak of anonymity. However, the system is like a hydro cut, off one head, and another grows in its place. Ironically, as traditional havens face more scrutiny, the United States is emerging as a major destination for secret money, with states like South Dakota hosting trusts that hold over $360 billion in hidden assets. So as that container ship docks at dawn, and its cargo is unloaded into a world of stark contrasts, remember what lies beneath the surface. This shadow system doesn't just hide wealth, it concentrates it. It siphons resources away from the public good and funnels them into the hands of a select few. The only way to fight it is with light. We need true global transparency, not just a patchwork of regulations. We need to demand accountability from our leaders and corporations. Because in the ongoing battle between visible trade and hidden flows, the future of our economies and societies hangs in the balance. If we let the shadows grow unchecked, they could one day eclipse us all. Imagine you're flying over the turquoise waters of the Cayman Islands. Below you, superyacht after superyacht lies anchored, each one longer than a football field, each worth $500 million. But if you try to find out who owns one of these giants, say the 140-meter Scheherazade, you'll hit a wall. The public registry offers just a single line: Marshall Islands Company. Click deeper and the trail goes cold, ending at a brass plate on an office building in Georgetown. No name, no nationality, just a mailbox. Welcome to the Invisible Fleet, the maritime arm of a global shadow system. A staggering 70% of the world's commercial ships sail under flags they are never physically seen: Panama, Liberia, the Marshall Islands. These three tiny nations register more shipping tonnage than the United States and China combined. This is how it works. A Greek shipping tycoon can buy a $400 million tanker, register it in Liberia, insure it in London, get financing in Singapore, and crew it with Filipinos. The result? He never pays a single cent of corporate tax anywhere. That ship might earn $50 million a year. And every single dollar slides quietly into a trust in the Cook Islands. A trust that doesn't even have to list who benefits from it. The man legally owns nothing, yet he controls everything. And this isn't some clever loophole. the entire operating system of modern global wealth. Let's rewind to 2017. A Malaysian financier named Joe Low throws a party that would make a Roman emperor blush. Right on a yacht off St. Tropez. Leonardo DiCaprio is there. So are Miranda Kerr and Farrell. Champagne flows like water. The money for this spectacle came from a sovereign wealth fund called 1MDB, which was supposed to build hospitals and schools for the people of Malaysia. Instead, $4.5 billion simply vanished. It was funneled through a maze of companies in the British Virgin Islands, trusts in the Caymans, and fake investment funds. When investigators finally untangled the mess, they found the money had been used to buy Picasso's diamonds, and even the rights to the movie The Wolf of Wall Street. All these assets were parked in structures that looked like Russian nesting dolls of secrecy. And Joe Low, he was never the legal owner of a single thing. He was just the advisor. That same year, a Reuters investigation uncovered something truly mind-boggling. A single building in the Cayman Islands, a modest 5-story office called Ugland House, serves as the registered address for 18,957 companies. Let that sink in. One mailbox for nearly 19,000 companies? That single building has more corporate residents than there are people living in the entire country. But this shadow system isn't just about stolen billions and luxury yachts. It's the silent engine running in the background of your everyday life. It's in your morning coffee and in the smartphone you're probably holding right now. Think about the cobalt in your phone's battery. It was likely dug from a Congolese mine. It's not mine is owned by a Swiss commodity giant, but through a subsidiary in Bermuda. The cobalt is then routed through a trading house in Dubai and insured in London, and the profit. It disappears into a zero-tax entity before it ever has a chance to benefit the country it came from. The miner who dug it out of the ground earns $2 a day. The layers of middlemen make hundreds of millions. And the final corporation at the top pays a tax rate of basically 0.001%. The mechanism behind this is brutally elegant. It's built on layer after layer of ownership, with each shell company located in a different country, each with its own secrecy laws. A typical structure looks something like this. The mine in Congo is owned by a holding company in the British Virgin Islands. That company is financed by a vehicle in Luxembourg, which uses a trading subsidiary in the Netherlands. The intellectual property is held by a company in Ireland. Finally, a company in the Cayman Islands declares the profit and pays absolutely nothing in taxes. By the time the money gets to the end of the line, it has crossed 6 borders and changed its legal identity 5 times. No single regulator can see the whole picture. No single government can tax it. And the big banks, they love it. The FinCEN files leak in 2020 revealed that giants like JP Morgan, HSBC, and Deutsche Bank had moved $2 trillion in suspicious transactions over 2 decades. Many of these transactions were for clients with no identifiable owner. In one case, a Russian client moved $1.1 billion through a single Barclays account. The account was registered to a company with no employees and a fake director. The bank kept processing the money for 8 years, even after its own internal staff raised red flags. The human cost of all this is staggering. The amount of money illicitly flowing out of Africa every year is over $90 billion. That's more than the entire continent receives in foreign aid and investment combined. Think of what that money could do. It's hospitals not being built, schools not being opened, and vaccines not being bought. In Latin America, drug cartels use these same techniques for money laundering. They over-invoice for imports and under-invoice for exports. The difference? Pure profit disappears into Miami real estate, bought through anonymous companies registered in Delaware. But here's the most dangerous part. This shadow system is no longer just for criminals and billionaires. It has become the default setting for global capitalism itself. Companies we use every day, Apple, Google, Amazon, Starbucks, have all used perfectly legal structures like the Irish-Dutch sandwich and Cayman entities to shift hundreds of billions in profits out of the countries where they were earned. In 2023, the European Union estimated that this kind of profit shifting costs its member states 170 billion euros a year. The United States loses $100 billion. Developing nations lose $200 billion. That's $500 billion every single year. Quietly vacuumed out of public budgets and into the pockets of those who already own the yachts. and the system just keeps growing. Today, more than 110,000 commercial vessels sail under these flags of convenience. The British Virgin Islands alone hosts over 950,000 registered companies, that's one for every 35 people who actually live there. And now a new digital shadow fleet is emerging. Decentralized autonomous organizations, crypto mixers, and NFT shells that can be created in minutes and dissolved in seconds, making the trail even harder to follow. We are living inside a masterpiece of engineered invisibility, a system built by the richest, tolerated by the most powerful, and paid for, one way or another, by everyone else. We open on a quiet street in Wilmington, Delaware. A modest two-story building at 1209 North Orange Street. Nothing about it looks special. Until you learn the truth, this single address is the legal home for 285,000 companies, including subsidiaries of Coca-Cola, Walmart, and half the Fortune 500. More corporations than people live in the entire state, the United States, the loudest preacher of transparency to the rest of the world, quietly become the planet's largest secrecy jurisdiction. The paradox has reached its final form. The same nations that condemn tax havens are now running the biggest ones. But something is shifting. In a glass-walled courtroom in London, a judge finally pierces the veil of a British Virgin Islands company that owns a $500 million Mayfair mansion. For the first time in history, the court orders the true owner, a Kazakh mining oligarch, hiding behind 4 layers of trusts, to be publicly named. The ruling is small, but it echoes like a gunshot. Within weeks, similar orders follow in Singapore, Dubai, and even the Cayman Islands. The machinery of secrecy is starting to rust. Across the Atlantic, the U.S. Corporate Transparency Act, watered down for years by lobbying, suddenly springs to life after a bipartisan revolt. From January 2026, every new company in America must report its real human owners to a federal database. Delaware lawyers call it the end of an era. South Dakota trust companies file frantic lawsuits. The invisible fleet begins to feel the first real wind of accountability. In Brussels, the EU's unshelled directive lands like a hammer blow. Any company with more than 75% of its income passing through without real employees or offices in the EU now faces an automatic 45% tax and public exposure. Overnight, thousands of Luxembourg and Maltese letterbox firms vanish from the map. Ireland quietly closes the loopholes that once sheltered Apple's massive tax bill. The Dutch sandwich is finally toast. Even the old empires of secrecy are cracking. The British Virgin Islands, under unrelenting pressure from London, passes public beneficial ownership legislation. Panama follows suit after losing correspondent banking relationships with U.S. banks. The Cayman Islands, facing the threat of being gray-listed again, begins sharing data with 120 countries automatically. And then there is technology, the double-edged sword that built the shadows and may now destroy them. Blockchain analytics firms trace crypto flows through mixers and offshore exchanges in real time. Satellite imagery combined with AI can spot unreported superyacht movements within hours. Machine learning algorithms scan global corporate registries for circular ownership patterns that scream money laundering. Interpol's new financial crime unit uses these tools to freeze $8 billion in oligarch assets in a single coordinated week, more than the previous decade combined. Yet the shadows fight back. New havens rise faster than the old ones fall. Ras Al Khaimah in the UAE markets golden shell companies with zero questions asked. Wyoming and Nevada rush to replace Delaware's lost business. Cryptocurrency privacy coins and decentralized identity protocols promise the next generation of anonymity. The arms race between secrecy and transparency is only just beginning. Here is the brutal truth we must finally face. The shadow system was never an accident. It was engineered by the winners of globalization to stay winning. Every dollar hidden offshore is a dollar not spent on a hospital bed, a teacher's salary, or a child's vaccine. The $35 trillion hidden in tax havens today equals roughly 1/3 of global GDP, enough to end extreme poverty 7 times over. Instead, it widens the chasm between the connected few and the disconnected billions. But history has a habit of correcting itself, slowly, violently, and all at once. When the French Revolution came for the aristocracy, It wasn't because the people suddenly discovered inequality. It was because the king could no longer pay his debts. When the British Empire lost India, it wasn't ideology alone. It was because the cost of control finally exceeded the profits. Every system built on extraction eventually reaches a breaking point. We are approaching that point now. The only question left is whether the correction will be orderly or chaotic. Whether we choose transparency through law and technology, or whether we wait for the next financial crash, the next pandemic, the next war, when the hidden trillions suddenly become visible as empty hospitals and angry mobs. The invisible fleet is still sailing, the mailboxes are still full, the yachts are still anchored in the dark. But for the first time in a century, the tide is turning. The shadows have grown so vast they can no longer hide from the light they themselves created. And when that light finally reaches every corner, every ledger, every shell, every secret, the world will either become fairer than it has ever been, or far more dangerous than we can imagine. The choice is no longer in the hands of kings, presidents, or billionaires. It is in ours. Thank you for watching this series. If this story matters to you, please share it. And as always, thank you for your support.